One of the things I like about the book, and I'm doing shameless plugs for this book, Family Values, Reset Trust, Boundaries, and Connection with Your Child. One of the things I love about this is it really gives some red flags, some ways for parents to notice, recognize when a child is hurting, when a child is having problems, because you start out by saying, we've got to have a baseline and you've got to compare your child to baseline.
Right.
I could come in and look at a child, even as a professional, and until I know what's normal for the child, I don't know whether he or she has deviated from some kind of norm. But parents know what that norm is.
Right. Or should know what that norm is.
Yeah, they should know what that
Right.
norm is. You talk about in the book, part one is finding the reset button and parenting with a new lens. And you didn't write this book for the pandemic, but it becomes acutely relevant because of the pandemic.
Correct. Yeah.
And you talk about parenting with a new lens. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think many parents feel that they're stuck, or it's too late, or I came from not great role models myself. What good can I do? I'm only doing what I came from. And that's what I'm trying to show them. It's not, you don't have to live with that. It's never too late. You can always be a better parent, even if you have an adult child. So it's never too late. And it's always should be invigorating to be able to reset yourself and look through a different lens. And that lens isn't going to come unless you take a good hard look at yourself and understand that where you came from doesn't mean that's where you have to stay. And many people say, and I'm sure you've heard it many times, I'm not going to do what my parents did. I'm going to do the exact opposite. But they end up running right into that and becoming their parents. And that's because they never looked at themselves and they didn't look at what they didn't like about what their parents did, understanding their parents probably did the best they could. And what do you want to do differently? And so that's what I talk about in part one. What can we do differently that's easy and simple to fix so that you can reset yourself and look through a different lens?
You and I have talked many times about generational legacy.
Right.
We all grow up with some aspects of our upbringing that we don't like and some that we do. When you say parents have to take a look at themselves, you got to decide, what did you carry from your parents into your parenting that's toxic? If your parents blew up and yelled and screamed and cussed and slammed things around and you see yourself doing that, you go, okay, this is a generational legacy. I'm carrying forward things that I lived with, and I shouldn't be carrying these forward. And that's
Right.
what you're saying. Let's look at this with a new lens. And you got to be willing to take a hard look at yourself and say, okay, am I doing the sins of my father? Am I doing the sins of my mother?
Right.
Am I doing the same things they did to me? Am I doing it to my own kids? Because I'll hear parents all the time say, oh, I hated when my mother did this, and I'm doing the same damn thing.
Right. They run right back into it. Also, when they're being triggered by their child, the 5-year-old that's having a tantrum is making you angry, probably because that 5-year-old in you isn't dealt with. It's looking at those triggers within yourself as well, because all of a sudden it's a 5-year-old fighting with a 5-year-old.
Yeah, because you never move past that.
Right.
You spent 22 years
Yes.
at DCFS, and you said whenever you went into these homes, the biggest things you saw missing were safety and permanence.
Correct. Emotional and physical safety and permanence. They didn't have a physical home that was safe and permanent. They didn't have an emotionally safe and permanent home either. Parents were immature. Parents were on drugs, or maybe not. But there's lots of domestic violence and lots of issues that are being triggered in parents that are not allowing them to stay emotionally safe and stable for their kids and permanent. And then physically, they're not giving them a home, or, the violence that's going on around them.
Now, this has nothing to do with socioeconomics. It has nothing to do with education. No. I know your practice, and you've got billionaires in your practice. You make it your business to see pro bono, indigent patients. You see them all up and down the socioeconomic and educational ladder. Homes where a child doesn't feel safe, physically or emotionally, is not limited to any one group, right?
No, absolutely. It has nothing to do with money, culture, tradition, nothing. It has to do with that person.
And some of the most dysfunctional homes are some of the most affluent homes.
Right. And some of the poorest homes are the safest homes.
Yeah. So when you're listening to this right now, I don't want you to get defensive, and maybe you're a parent, maybe you're a grandparent thinking about what your grandkids are living with, or kids in your church or neighborhood are living with. We have to take care of each other.
Right.
And right now, we were talking about mandated reporters weren't there to look after these kids. You don't have to be contractually mandated to be someone that looks out for a kid.
Correct.
If you have a kid in the neighborhood, and I've dealt with situations over the 20 years of DrPhil where the neighbor had 4 kids, but they only ever saw 3 playing outside.
Right.
And after 3 or 4 years, they find out one of them's not playing outside because they're locked under the stairs.
Right.
And when they call DCFS and they go in there, maybe on their 3rd visit, they finally hear some scratching and they go look, and here's this one kid for some reason locked under the stairs and malnourished, et cetera, et cetera. So we've got to be eyes and ears, but it starts with you. If you're a parent or a grandparent, you've got to ask, he's talking about safety and permanence. Do the children in your orbit, whether you're a parent or a grandparent, do they experience physical safety? Do they feel confident that they're protected by you, by the adults in their life, and that they're not in danger from you? And the same with emotional safety. You say it refers to a state that a child is given to live in where relationships have attachment,
Right.
predictability.
Right.
They should be able to predict their parent is going to be there 100 out of 100 times.
Right. The consistency. They need to count on that. Otherwise, the floor is always falling out. They never feel safe or secure.
I did an interview today with a set of parents from Uvalde, and their child was murdered by the shooter in Uvalde. It's so interesting that this is right at the top of your book, because they said, we didn't keep our child physically safe. And of course, they did everything they could. There was nothing they could have done.
Right.
But what they're holding themselves to standard-wise is they're saying, we didn't keep our child physically safe. We feel like she didn't feel emotionally safe because they think she was in there for 77 minutes.
Yeah.
And the children were calling on the phone for over 40 minutes to the 911 dispatcher, 2 phone calls, totaling over 40 minutes, saying, please come help us. Why won't you come help us? He is here. He's shooting people in the next room right now. Why won't you come help us? And they were just crazed
and helpless
because of it. And they were saying, so we know she didn't feel emotionally safe.
Right.
She was probably saying, where's my mommy? Where's my daddy?
Right.
Right up until she got shot. I asked them straight up, do you feel like you failed your daughter? And they said, yes, we didn't keep her physically or emotionally safe.
Right.
And we open your book and you say the number one thing is provide yourself physical and emotional safety.
Right.
Now, they did and think they didn't because of what happened, but every parent that's listening to us right now has the chance to do that.
Yes, they do.
They have the chance to do what you're saying.
And I hope they do it. I really do.
It's the beginning of everything, right?
It's the foundation for every core of your child to feel safe. They just need to feel safe.
But in the real world, when parents try to do this, the kid, you call it shaking them off, that they act like they don't want that. Like, oh, yeah, I'm fine. Leave me alone. Leave me alone. What do you tell parents when they get the eye roll and I'm fine, leave me alone?
That's a great sign. You're not supposed to be their friend. They're not going to like what you're doing. That's how you know it's the right thing, because they're going to fight it and be resistant. So just stick with it. And eventually they learn that that's what it means. I love you. I'm here and I'm not moving.
When I was reading the first draft of your manuscript, it made me think of a friend that I had named John Maloney in high school. This was really a good-looking kid. He was blonde and just ripped, six-pack. This was the toughest kid I think I ever met. I mean, he'd fight a buzzsaw. He didn't care. We were at my house one night in the winter in Kansas City, and there was an ice storm, and we were going to go watch the basketball game at our high school. We went bounding down the stairs to leave, and my mother said, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, where are you going?" I said, "We're going to the basketball game." She said, "Oh, no, you're not. You're not going anywhere. It's slick out there. Just get back upstairs and think of something else to do." And there wasn't any point in arguing. So
Yeah.
I turned around, went back up there, and I looked over at John, and he was kind of trying to hide, looking out the window, and didn't understand why. And I kind of went around and looked at him, and he had tears running down his face. I thought, wow, he must have really wanted to see that basketball game. And I said, "Hey, man, are you okay?" He stood there for a minute and said, "I just wish one time in my life somebody cared enough about me to tell me I couldn't go somewhere because it was too dangerous."
So sad.
He said, "Never in my life has anybody ever told me, no, I couldn't go somewhere because it would put me in danger." I just never heard that before in my life. And in that moment, I understood why he was so tough, why he was so get them before they get me, why he was so hard.
Very defended against the pain.
Yeah, it was just his way of defending himself against the world, and he was so touched. I was like, "Oh, God, it's her again." So you go back upstairs, don't even argue.
But it's her love again.
Yeah, and he saw it that way.
Right.
I took it for granted. He saw it that way.
Right.
It's really interesting.
Yeah. Every kid craves it.
Yeah, every kid craves it.
And they will fight it.
So when your kids roll their eyes when they try to say, "Oh, come on," let me tell you, at some level, it means something to them. Maybe they won't acknowledge it for 10 years, but it's not your job to make them happy. It's your job to keep them safe.
Right. Physically and emotionally.
Yeah. It's so funny that came back to me when I read that first draft of the manuscript. It was so insightful. And I hope all my listeners will take heed to that right now and ask yourself, if you don't have that, what can you do in your family to make that part of your existence right now? I always tell parents, for example, after a divorce or after some big change or trauma in the family, one thing the kid needs to see is that there's somebody around that's continuing to run the business of the family.
Correct.
Parents often go the other way and say, "Well, this has been really tough, so I'll be indulgent right now." That's the time that they need to still do their homework, still get in bed at the same time. That's when they need to say, "Hey, it seems like everything's falling apart, but yet it's business as usual. So all the rules still apply. I guess my world's not falling apart."
That's right. That's the message. And that's why part of the reason writing this book is whenever we have a plan for a family to get back together and reunify in the county or in DCFS, it's built on building and teaching parents how to build emotional and physical safety and permanence for their child. Then we could put a child back in a home. So if a family doesn't have that right now, you want to avoid the system, read the book and do the things. It's not that hard.
It's not that hard, but it's only not that hard if you do this on purpose.
Correct.
It's not a matter of just saying, "I want to be better." It's a matter of saying, "I've got a plan to be better."
Correct. Yes.
Chapter 2 of your book, you say, "Change yourself, change your child."
Right.
Because they do mirror you. I think we get out of the universe what we put out.
Yes.
We put something in the universe, it comes back.
Right.
And you put something out to your child, it comes back.
Right.
Talk about that some. What do you mean specifically when you say change yourself, change your child?
Take self-inventory. Look at yourself. Look at where you want to be, what you want to shed, what you want to change, and then start to role model it. Because role model is 100% what your child's going to do. Even if they don't do it in front of you, they're going to do it when they're not in front of you. How many times you hear, oh, your child's a role model citizen in somebody else's home, but they won't put their dishes in the sink after dinner. But you know that they've been watching you do it. They're not going to do it for you maybe, because the last thing they want to do is make you happy. But at the end of the day, they're going to role model you. And that's what it means.
Yeah. And you've got some exercises in the book for people to do to kind of take this inventory. But you can't really do this if you're not willing to forget about being defensive, forget about how it may look, forget about how you may grade your own paper and not like the grade. You got to be really willing to look at yourself and say, how am I doing?
Ego aside.
Yeah.
This is about your kid.
Yeah. Because if you really want the best for your kid, ego is not your amigo.
No, exactly.
You got to kick that to the curb.
Right. Exactly. Because that's what's getting in the way in the first place.
Yeah.
You have needs that are not being met and you're putting them first. And in fact, if you put your child first, your needs will be met.
Yeah. It's interesting that even though these children come from us and there's genetic components and stuff, they're not mini-me's. They have their own personalities. Right. They have their own nuances and stuff. And we have to allow for that.
And respect it.
Yeah.
And embrace it. Because the last thing a child needs to feel is that you don't like them or who they are or how they maneuver, because they're going to do it more. Number one. And number two, teach them how to use it as a strength.
Yeah. They're going to be different.
They should be different.
You know my two boys.
Yes.
And they're very different.
They are.
From each other.
Yeah.
But they're very successful uniquely in their own ways, right. Even though they're very different.
Very different. Yep.
I've always tried to really embrace and endorse those differences.
You have to.
Jordan's got 100% more tattoos than I do.
Really? I didn't notice.
Because I have 0. Right. He's got a shitload.
Right.
But that's him. I wanted him to have none, but I realized that's who he is.
Right. Why squash it?
And my other son, Jay, has none.
Right.
And Jay getting tattoos would be as unnatural as Jordan having none.
Right.
So you got to meet them where they are.
You have to. Otherwise, they feel bad about themselves. Self-esteem plummets.
Yeah.
Self-worth isn't there. What's the point? You're only going to have to repair it anyway.
Yeah. Jordan used to come in sometimes and he would have bright blue hair.
Right.
I say, what the hell is that? Robin would say, are you okay with that bright blue hair? I say, hey, listen, anything you can wash off, I'm good with.
Right.
Until he's 18.
Right.
And then I got a suspicion it's going to be something you can't wash off.
And it was.
Sure enough, it was.
Right.
But he makes it work, right?
Of course. And it's part of who he is.
Yeah. You got to meet them where they are. You can't do that if you don't understand your own baggage.
Right.
Because if you have a need to control who they are, that's not really about them.
Right.
That's about you needing to control them. These kids need a lot of validation. They need a lot of individuality, and they're intimidated. A lot of these kids are intimidated by things they used to take in stride.
Yep.
Have you seen that?
100%. I mean, kids that didn't have anxiety now have a lot more. Kids who already had some have a lot. Like they have an actual disorder at this point. Some of it's OCD, some of it's generalized anxiety, but they don't want to leave the house. They don't want to separate. Social anxiety. You know, it's reached levels where kids were used to being home in a little cocoon now.